that, I encourage and I vote on this rule. Let's get down to work. That's what the American people want us to do. And I hope and pray that I've cleaned up for Mr. Bishop. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to respond to something that my distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee said. You know, he implied that when my colleague from Massachusetts said that the Republican budget plans would literally take the food out of the mouths of children, that somehow we were engaged in hyperbole or some kind of empty rhetoric. I don't know whether my chairman knows that tomorrow in the House Agriculture Committee, under direction of the Republican leadership, that they're going to cut $33 billion out of the SNAP program.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'm happy to yield.
I would say to my friend, obviously we have to deal with very, very serious fiscal challenges that exist here, and I know that these state-run programs are designed to ensure that those who are truly in need are able to benefit, and so no one has a desire to take food from the mouths of hungry children.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, but $33 billion in cuts will reduce benefits to people. It will take literally food off the table for many families, and a lot of working families too. And so under the Republican leadership's direction, the Agriculture Committee is not going after excessive subsidies in big agribusinesses. It's going after SNAP, food stamps. I'm going to have an amendment in the Rules Committee today. We bring up the transportation bill. I think for the 15th time I've offered it, to go after the billions of dollars that we give to oil companies in subsidies. Taxpayers subsidize these programs. We never get an opportunity to vote on the House floor.
Would the gentleman yield on that
point? The Republican leadership is not only not allowing me to do that, they're not saying we should go after and trim this corporate welfare. What they're saying is $33 billion in cuts in SNAP. That is outrageous. And I know we have difficult. I'll yield to the gentleman in 1 second. I know these are difficult budgetary times. But I mean, you know, to not ask the Donald Trumps of the world to pay a little bit more, and then instead to cut $33 billion in SNAP, or to not insist that we pay for these wars that seem to go on forever, and let that add to our debt, but go after poor people who are on SNAP. That's where the outrage is. I can't believe that that's the first place we're turning. I'm happy to yield to the gentleman.
I thank my friend for yielding. And let me just say that I agree with part of his statement here, that being that we need to look at overall tax reform. And I concur with the notion of reducing any kind of subsidies. I don't like the idea of engaging in social planning through tax policy. I hope that in the context of overall tax reform that we'll be able to do exactly what my friend is arguing when it comes to the issue of subsidization. I thank my friend for yielding.
May I inquire of the gentleman from Utah how many more speakers he has?
How many would you like me to have?
As many as you want.
Then we'll have that many, but I hope it won't be. I hope I will be the last.
All right, Madam Speaker, then I will close for our side.
1.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to ensure that Republicans can't use so-called reconciliation procedures to force through the elimination of Medicare as we know it, or force through cuts in Medicare benefits to seniors or people with disabilities. Madam Speaker, I ask that unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment and the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. Madam Speaker, you know, we have a choice here. We can either balance our budget and deal with our deficit and our debt in a fair and balanced manner, or we can do it in the way that the Republican leadership has proposed, which is to basically put the burden on middle-income families and those struggling to get into the middle, and to put an added burden on our senior citizens. And make no mistake about it, that if you vote for this rule, you are voting to end the Medicare guarantee. That is their plan. That is what they have said. There is no question about it. I think it is outrageous. I think when when Warren Buffett pays a lower tax rate than his secretary, there is something wrong with our tax system. When corporations get all these special loopholes so they don't have to pay taxes, but middle-income families have to, there's something wrong with this system. We need some balance. So I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question, and I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Back, gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There is, as I finish this, a couple of areas I want to talk about. There are children who are preparing to go to preschool today who have lived their entire lives without seeing the Senate actually pass a budget. Were that not the case, we would not be here with this particular issue, and if they actually were to pass a budget, we would go forward without this particular issue. Once again, merits of the budget notwithstanding, this vote does not implement anything. It allows us the procedure to go forward to implement something. The underlying bill still does talk about the ability of those of us who live in public land states to have hunting and fishing rights guaranteed and protected without the heavy hand of Washington bureaucrats stopping that concept. Indeed, state law will have to be considered before they do any kind of concepts. I also want to put one other concept before you, and just in closing, that illustrates the problem we have with the American people and how we waste money, and indeed that needs to be one of the first things of our consideration. CBO has scored this bill as potentially costing $12 million. It doesn't make a difference that there is nothing mandated in here that needs to have a review under the NEPA process of these bills. The administration said that we might have to go through this process, therefore you should score it at $12 million. Let's make an assumption that you actually had to go through the reprocessing of going through all the land management plans, and I would ask the people the question, does it make sense that it would take $12 million for the Park Service and the BLM to decide whether hunting would or would not be allowed? Could that not be done with the Secretary and a cell phone within a week if we actually were decent about what we are attempting to do? When indeed we have bills like this in which the administration and the government is trying to say it would cost $12 million to make the decision of whether hunting is allowed or not, it puts all of our efforts into question. It does not make sense, and it may be one of the reasons why we need to look at what we are doing internally first, and that would be an appropriate thing to take place. Madam Speaker, in closing, I want to reiterate that this is still a procedural vote on a rule that is extremely fair, and it is appropriate to the underlying legislation of 4089, which does talk about fishing and hunting rights, preserving that time-honored tradition, and indeed allowing those of us in the West to make sure that we are not precluded from those traditional areas of activity. It's a good bill. And more importantly, this is a fair rule, and I urge you to adopt it. And with that, I will yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker?
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
On that, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question will be followed by 5-minute votes on adopting Resolution 614, if ordered, and suspending the rules and passing H.R. 1815. This is a 15-minute vote.
So 3 votes in the House right now. Members are voting on a procedural motion related to the rule for this bill supporting and expanding hunting and fishing on federal land. Then there will be a vote on the rule itself. That will be followed by a vote on a suspension bill debated yesterday. Prior to rule debate today, Congresswoman Gwen Moore called for a vote against a tactic that Republicans used to insert language into the debate rules that would approve the GOP budget proposal with the passage of the rule. So if this rule for debating the sportsman bill is passed, according to the rule, the Republican budget would also be considered passed by both houses of Congress. Assuming that the rule passes, when that vote does come up, we expect general and amendment debate to follow. Later this week, highway and mass transit legislation and taxes on small businesses. The House voting in the first of a series of 3 votes. Right now, a vote on a procedural motion related to the Sportsman Bill, expanding hunting and fishing on federal lands and allowing polar bear caucuses to be brought into the U.S. if they were killed before 2008. We expect a vote on the rule itself after this, and then a vote on giving the Congressional Gold Medal to actress Lena Horne. Well, today is the deadline to file federal income tax returns. About half of American workers pay no federal income taxes, and taxpayers in the top 40% of earners pay an average rate of about 11%. On Facebook today, we're asking, do you pay your fair share in taxes? You can join the conversation at facebook.com/cspan.
Both the yeas are 235, the nays are 179. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
On that, I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favored of recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. It's a 5-minute vote.
So the second of 3 votes now, with a vote on the rule for debating the Sportsman Bill, expanding hunting and fishing on federal lands. After this, a vote on giving the Congressional Gold Medal to actress Lena Horne. Now, if you were watching earlier, the House had been working on this bill for supporting and expanding hunting and fishing in federal lands. Before rule debate got started, Congresswoman Gwen Moore called for a vote against a tactic that Republicans use to insert language into the debate rules that would approve the GOP budget proposal with the passage of the rule. So if this rule for debating the Sportsman Bill is passed, according to the rule, the Republican budget would also be considered passed by both houses of Congress. Assuming the rule passes, we do expect general and amendment debate to follow. This is a 5-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 228, the nays are 184. The motion is adopted without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Luke DeMeyer, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1815, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1815, a bill to posthumously award a Congressional Gold Medal to Lena Horne in recognition of her achievements and contributions to American culture and the civil rights movement.
Question is, will House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
Well, yesterday the House debated several honorary bills, one for golfer Jack Nicklaus, Raul Wallenberg, who helped to shelter Jewish people during the Holocaust, and this measure giving actress and civil rights activist Lena Horne the Congressional Gold Medal. She passed away in 2010. This will be the last vote in this series. Up next, general debate on the Sportsman bill. The Senate's back from their weekly party caucuses. This afternoon, it's more work on a postal reform measure. This morning, they voted to move forward with that legislation. You can see live coverage of the Senate on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. And today, Space Shuttle Discovery brought the nation's shuttle program to a close as it came to a final landing at Dulles International Airport in Virginia. Before landing, the shuttle was flown over the D.C. area, passing the monuments, the Capitol, and the White House. Thousands of people watched from roadsides and rooftops. And the space shuttle will now go on display at the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center. It's part of the National Air and Space Museum near Dulles Airport in Virginia.
This vote, the yeas are 410, the nays are 2. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Will the House come to order, please? All members take their conversations from the floor. All members who are staying, please be seated. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington state?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill H.R. 4098.
Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 614 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 4089. The Chair appoints the gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Emerson, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
Ready? House will be in order. The committee will be in order. Will all members please take their conversations off the floor? Okay, it's still. The committee will be in order. House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 4089, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to protect and enhance opportunities for recreational hunting, fishing, and shooting.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, will each control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Chairman, I rise in strong support of H.R. 4089, the Sportsman's Heritage Act of 2012. This legislation protects the traditional right of American sportsmen to hunt, fish from arbitrary and unjustified bureaucratic restrictions and limitations. It will remove government roadblocks to these activities on certain public lands and guard against new regulations that threaten hunting and fishing. This is a bipartisan bill, Madam Chairman. It has a bipartisan sponsorship of the Republicans and Democrat chairs of the Congressional Sportsman Congress, Mr. Miller of Florida, Mr. Ross of Arkansas, as well as the caucus vice chairs, Mr. Latta of Ohio and Mr. Schuler of North Carolina. This bill also has the broad support of America's recreational fishing, hunting, shooting, and wildlife conservation community. And at the appropriate time, I will include 2 letters, one from over 35 sportsmen's organizations and one from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, for the record.
The House will be in order. Will all members please take conversations off the floor? Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There are 4 titles to this legislation, and each reflects standalone bills sponsored by individual members of the House. Mr. Benishek of Michigan, Mr. Flake of Arizona, Mr. Young of Alaska, and Mr. Miller of Florida all deserve credit for leadership on these important sportsman issues. Their 4 bills were assembled in this package to be among the first pro-sportsman's bill considered and I hope passed by the House this year. I expect and anticipate further action on additional legislation in the months ahead. This legislation is an affirmative declaration that Americans' ability to fish and hunt is not arbitrarily subject to limitation by the whim of federal bureaucrats. It makes clear that public lands are open until closed to such recreational activities, and it makes absolutely clear, Madam Chairman, that the EPA does not have the authority to regulate ammunition and fishing tackle. This bill is not a solution in search of a problem, but regrettably, bureaucratic threats to hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting are very real, thus the need for this legislation. Title I of this bill protects sportsmen from arbitrary federal efforts to block hunting and fishing on public lands managed by the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, or the BLM. It requires that these activities be supported and facilitated. But, this is very important, Madam Chairman, it does not prioritize hunting and fishing over other multiple uses. The vast majority of our nation's public lands are to be open and available for multiple uses, but regrettably, there are agency personnel and land managers who attempt to control these lands as personal fiefdoms and prevent legitimate uses and activities, including hunting and fishing. In addition, activist groups bring lawsuits to limit these activities, and in the worst situations, bureaucrats willingly roll over to such lawsuits as a convenient way to limit the use of these facilities. This bill will protect against such lawsuits and the ensuing costly paperwork associated with them. Title II of the bill directly addresses the sudden attempt last year by the Obama administration's Bureau of Land Management to limit target shooting on certain lands. An agency spokesman was cited in a news article saying that their proposed ban was being enacted in response to urbanites who, and I quote, freak out, end quote, when they hear shooting, and that the restriction wasn't rooted in public safety, but rather to reduce, and I quote again, social conflict, end quote. This proposed ban echoes the Obama administration's attempt to impose a new classification of wild lands on federal property in an attempt to unilaterally establish de facto wilderness. Now, Madam Chairman, I want to remind my colleagues once again, only Congress has the authority to establish wilderness areas. Just as with the wild lands proposal, public outcry against the BLM's attempt to limit target and recreational shooting forced Interior Secretary Salazar to retreat from this effort, and rightfully so. However, at any point, say right after the November election, the administration could again attempt such a ban on such activities. This is exactly why this legislation is necessary, because it would clearly provide that any closure must be specifically and publicly justified and be for reasons of national security, public safety, or to comply with federal or state laws. Title III of the bill would allow for the importation of certain legally taken trophies from Canada that, through no fault of the sportsman, have become trapped in a bureaucratic limbo. This is focused squarely on resolving existing situations ensnarled in red tape and does not open the door to unlimited future imports. Finally, Title IV of the bill is in response to perhaps the greatest bureaucratic threat posed, and that threat comes in the form of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. In 1976, Congress barred the EPA from regulating firearms and ammunition. However, This has not stopped attempts to try and circumvent the law with the argument that EPA may not be able to regulate ammunition, but it can regulate components of ammunition and components of fishing tackle. Regulating components of ammunition and fishing tackle would be a massive power grab by the EPA, despite a clear lack of legal authority. But has that stopped the EPA under this administration? Sadly, it hasn't. The EPA is an unfettered agency with an appetite for greater regulation that result in a greater stranglehold of our economy and how Americans are allowed to live their lives. But, unfortunately, the EPA is not without its allies. In March, over 100 activist anti-hunting and environmental groups petitioned the EPA to ban the use of lead in hunting and fishing components. This is an overt attempt to end-run a law that has been on the books for nearly 40 years. This legislation that the House will vote on today reiterates and clarifies existing law, leaving no question that the EPA does not have the authority to regulate ammunition and fishing tackle. Madam Chairman, hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting are long-standing American traditions that deserve protection, which is exactly what this underlying legislation does, the Sportsman's Heritage Act of 2012. This is why the bill has received strong bipartisan support and the endorsement of dozens of sporting and wildlife organizations. So I again want to commend the sponsors for their work and encourage all of my colleagues to support and vote for this legislation. I also want to thank Chairman Upton of the Energy and Commerce Committee and Chairman Lucas of the Agriculture Committee for their cooperation and insistence in helping to expedite consideration of this bill. At the appropriate time, I will again insert in the record an exchange of letters between me and those chairmen regarding this legislation. With that, I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 489.